Well, hello everybody and welcome to Jeff's Baking Blog. Today I'm going to be making English muffin toasting bread. This is a recipe that I saw on King Arthur Baking. I actually was thinking the other day about English muffins and wondered whether you could make a bread with it which would just be suitable for toasting, really, not for sandwiches. And I thought it might be easier, so I did a quick search and I came up with this recipe on King Arthur Baking. It looked quite good, so I did a test and it turned out very well. In fact, this is what my test looks like. So you can see you've got the lovely holes there, which the sort of the texture that you get from an English muffin, so that when you toast it and put the butter on, the butter fills those little crevices. It's quite simple. In fact, it's much simpler than making English muffins. It's quite simple to make. And I'll go straight on to the ingredients. And for this, I have 360 grams of bread flour. You could use plain flour. That works out at 2 1/3 cups plus a tablespoon, based on scooping packed flour into a 250 milliliter cup. Then I have 9 grams, 1½ teaspoons of salt. I have 14 grams, 1 tablespoon, just slightly over, but 1 tablespoon of sugar. I'm using caster sugar, but granulated is fine. 9 grams, which is just about 3 teaspoons of instant yeast. Now, if you only have one of those 7-gram packets, you could still do this recipe using the 7-gram packet, but you would have to let the dough proof for longer until it gets to where it needs to be. And then I have 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. I have 1 cup, 240 milliliters of milk. I have 60 milliliters, 1/4 cup of water, and I have 25 grams, which is 2 tablespoons of oil. I'm using vegetable oil. So the first thing to do is simply to mix all the dry ingredients together. So I'll put them all into a larger bowl, and I'll put the yeast in last so I can mix the salt into the flour before the yeast goes on top of it. I'll just give it a bit of a mix around like that. As we work with it, it will get mixed in better. And then I will sprinkle the yeast on the top and just leave it there for the time being. Then the next step is to heat these 3 liquids until they're about 49 degrees Celsius, 120 Fahrenheit. It's slightly hotter than lukewarm, but I mean lukewarm would be fine. You don't want it too hot because it will kill the yeast later on when it goes into the flour mixture. So I'm going to put them all into the same jug and give them a stir around, and then I'm simply going to heat those in the microwave until I get to that temperature. So I have my liquid at 49 Celsius now. So I'm just going to stir the yeast into the flour, and then I'm going to pour the liquid in. Now you could do this in a stand mixer, but it takes so little time, I don't think it's worth getting the stand mixer out. So with that mixture in, you're going to stir that around using a wooden spoon, or I'm going to use my Danish dough whisk. And I'm going to work that for 2 to 3 minutes only, until it's all incorporated and it's nice and stretchy. And all I'm going to do is just stir it around and pull it up, and do that for 2 to 3 minutes. Now, as you can see, that's already very stretchy, and that's just been 2 minutes. So I think that's good enough. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that into a £2 loaf tin. And £2 loaf tins seem to come in slightly different sizes, and certainly in different shapes. Some are more square and some are more have a more slanted side. But this particular one that I'm using has an interior surface at the top which measures 21.5 centimetres by 11 centimetres. That is 8.5 inches by 4 inches, and it worked perfectly for my test. So all I'm going to do is to pick that dough out of the bowl and into this loaf tin, which I have greased, and I have dusted the side with semolina. You could use cornmeal. At a pinch you just could use flour, I suppose, but with English muffins you normally dust them with semolina or cornmeal. So I'm going to tip this in and then try to level it out. What I've done is I've just wet the tips of my fingers so I can spread that out a little bit like that. That's good enough. So I'm going to cover that with some greased plastic wrap, and I'm going to put it into a warm place and allow it to prove for about 45 minutes. What I want it to do is to come up to the top of the loaf tin and just rise slightly above by about 1/4 of an inch. And when that's done that, it's ready to bake. So by that time I will have my oven preheated to 200 Celsius. That's 180 Celsius with a fan, 400 Fahrenheit, and it will then be ready to bake. But I'll come back and show you before it goes in the oven. So my English muffin toasting bread dough has been in the pan now for about 45 minutes, and it was in a warm place, and it's risen and it's just slightly above the top of my loaf pan, as I said it should be. So I'm going to put that into my preheated oven now, and I'm going to bake it for between 22 and 27 minutes. And it should rise more in the oven. It should go a nice dark sort of colour on the top. And if I test it with my thermometer, the internal temperature should be about 88 Celsius, which is 190 Fahrenheit. I will actually leave mine until it goes slightly higher than that, and then once it's maybe up to 200 Fahrenheit, I will take it out of the oven and I will put it straight onto a wire rack to cool down. Then I'll come back and show you the results. I baked the English muffin toasting bread for 25 minutes. After 22 minutes it had hit the 88 Celsius 190 Fahrenheit temperature. In fact, it had slightly exceeded it, but I baked for a further 3 minutes, by which time it had risen up to 95 Celsius, which is about 202 Fahrenheit, I think, something like that. And so I knew that it was fully baked through. I took it out, put it onto the rack and allowed it to cool, and I've cut it so that you can see inside. So this is the one I test one yesterday, and this is today's one, sliced there. Looks very, very similar to the test one. And I'm actually not going to taste it because it would mean I have to toast it. I do have a picture of yesterday's one toasted, and I'll put that in here so you can see that it toasts up very nicely indeed. And that's going to be it for this recipe. I hope you've enjoyed it, and if you have, please give me the thumbs up below the video and click to subscribe to my YouTube channel. In the top right hand corner of the screen there will be an I that you can click on, and that will take you to a link for this recipe, and I'll put a link for it below the video as well, and I'll be back with another recipe in the very near future. So until then, happy baking.